Welcome to Adeptus On-Air, the show where we examine how individuals and companies make decisions that drive their business and personal success. Each week, we connect with notable professionals who pull back the curtain on the industries that Adeptus has been on the cutting edge of for the last 30 years, including music, sports, and entertainment, as well as new emerging markets.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Adeptus On-Air. I am your host, Mike Hoffman, and so excited today to be joined by Kate DiCamillo. Kate, how are you today?
I'm very, very happy to be talking to you. As you know, I have the dog here, and I also have a head cold, so it should be a super interesting conversation.
Great. Well, hopefully you're on some good medicines. We get some good stuff out of you. So,
but it's exciting to get to talk to you.
No, this is great. You know, I'm not the biggest reader. And as a kid, I'll be honest with you, for me, it was always a strain. But when I look at some of the names of the books that you've got nowhere to get to, for me to actually recognize the names has to mean that there's some impact on what you've done. Because with the exception of Super Fudge and like Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing and maybe one other, I don't have a lot of, I can't name you a lot of children's books. But I look at your list and, I definitely, they come to my mind maybe because of the movie, the movies and so forth. But it's quite an impressive list. So I'm really looking forward to kind of talking to you.
That is a wonderful compliment, and I'll take it. And can I also say that from as soon as I learned to read, was nothing but a reader, but talked to Larry about me and numbers and the pathetic things I turn into him.
Yeah. Well,
I'm no good with numbers at all. I can't.
That's what makes the world such a good place. We all have our lanes, and some of us go outside our lane once in a while. Maybe it's a good change. Sometimes we realize we better get back into our lane. But at the same point in time, that's what makes the world good, that I could talk to you and we really are in very different lanes. But I think it's good to talk about each other's and to kind of learn about it. So I'm looking forward to it.
I said to you in the green room, oh no, are we going to talk about business? Because
yeah,
I'm going to be up a creek without a paddle if we're going to talk about business. So we'll talk a little bit about books, and then we'll talk about Larry and how kind he is when I send him my numbers that don't make any sense to me.
Now, did Larry give you a script on what to say about him? Because I could totally see him doing that.
He didn't.
He didn't. Okay.
I know that we'll talk about Larry towards the end, but I want to say that I've never known a more patient, kind person.
No.
And that's that thing where I really do struggle with numbers.
And
it's hard for me, and he's so kind to me.
So let's take a step back a long time. I won't say how many years, but let's kind of go back to your childhood. And, I read some interesting stories about, how you were kind of introduced to kind of storytelling, but just kind of talk about how that passion kind of, was instilled in you.
Yeah, there are lots of different things that kind of combined. One of them was I was born in Philadelphia. We moved to Florida when I was 5 years old, into a very small town in Central Florida, and that was instrumental as far as storytelling goes, because it was a dead-end street. There were 3 widow ladies on one side. The other side of the street was all families with kids, and we got to talk to those ladies and hear stories, learn how to tell stories. So that was one thing. Another thing was that I had a mother who read to me, took me to the library, bought me books, and just kind of facilitated my life as a reader, and saw very clearly that words were the thing for me. And so she did everything she could to nourish that kind of passion.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I have those memories as well, being read to, and in turn, I have 2 daughters, doing the same thing to them. It's amazing how some people, though, just, I don't want to say buy into it, but just fall in love with that entire, we talk about lane of reading, lane of writing, because I have 2 daughters and one was more a reader than the other. And I think I kind of parented them this the same way. My wife loves to read. I don't love to read. I'm much more inclined to watch a movie and have someone else's interpretation as opposed to her using her mind. But Yeah, so it was instilled in you at a young age, and then, but at what point in time did you say, okay, a lot of people like to read, but
Yeah.
you took it one step further and said, not only do I like to read, not only do I like stories, but now I want to become a storyteller.
Yeah, so that was this is where we get to make fun of me at great length, and I'll be the first person to do it. Sit down, Ramona. The dog has some questions.
Yeah,
So I went to University of Florida, majored in English, which was like as a reader, like you get a syllabus. It's got 20 different books that you're supposed to buy with your parents' money on it and
yeah,
read. It's like this is great. And the adults would say to me sometimes, "What are you going to do with an English degree?" And I would go, don't bother me with your silly questions. It's
yeah.
just, and I had no career plans or anything. I was just having a great time reading and going to school. And I figured it would be that way for the rest of my life, I guess.
Hmm.
Then I had a professor my senior year who said to me, you, this is a direct quote, you have a certain facility with words, period. You should consider graduate school, period. And because I was so young and full of myself, I thought that he was saying to me, wow, you sure are talented. You're a really good writer. And so I
Yeah,
thought, why should I bother going to graduate school? I'm just going to go off and be a writer. So I graduated. I purchased a black turtleneck. I put it on. I sat around looking bored and disdainful because that's what writers do.
yeah, that's right.
And I spent a good 10 years that way talking about writing, posturing as a writer, dreaming of being a writer. And it wasn't until I was 30 that I actually sat down and started to do the work of it because it occurred to me. This is like when I go into a room full of kids and talk to them about becoming a writer. It occurred to me that nothing was going to happen unless I wrote something, you know?
Sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
talk is cheap.
Yeah, right. Talk is cheap, and boy, and it's funny when I talk to younger kids, this math doesn't work for them, this emotional math, but it works for adults very well. I discovered that it was easier to do the work than it was not to do the work. And kids, that's a concept that it takes a while, it takes some life experience to get. But
Yeah.
it's just like it's easier to do it than it is to dream about doing it.
And sometimes the process before you do it, and it kind of goes back to the same concept of like procrastination, and things like that. Sometimes it's the anxiety, the angst, the stress before you do it. It's a lot worse than the actual act of doing it.
Absolutely, it
Whether it's
is.
going to a doctor's appointment, oh my God, you build it up for 3 weeks and then you're there for 20 minutes. Like, that's what I worried about for 3 weeks.
Absolutely. And that's the thing. And I think it takes a while to learn that. And it's funny because the other thing that I talk to the kids about is it's like I say, okay, so you're writing, you start to send stories out, what do you get back? And they always say the same thing, money. And it's like, yep, nope, what you get is a rejection letter. And then
Mm-hmm.
I talk to them about how many rejection letters I got over time, which is something like 473.
Wow.
And they're just absolutely appalled by that. And sometimes they'll ask, you know why why did you keep on going? And it's for that very thing right there that I had learned by the time I sat down to do it, that it was easier to keep on doing it and be relentless than it was to just dread not doing it. And to it's like I couldn't control if I was talented, could control if I was lucky. I could
Right.
make myself do the work. I could make myself put the work out in the world. It was a lot easier than wanting to do the work.
So, what was the first break? So, you have these rejections coming in and so forth, but what was the first aha moment where, okay, this is a little, I got some feet under this thing?
Yeah, I started to get um it sounds so ridiculous, but at this point I was writing short stories for adults. I started to get um personalized rejection letters. Like, they were saying, this, try us again. This, your use of language, blah 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 blah. So and then I thought, okay, this might be something I can do. And then and in the meantime, I'd gotten a job here in Minneapolis in a book warehouse, and I was assigned to the third floor, which was all children's books. I started reading those books, and I thought, man, I want to try to do something like this. So I started on my first book, which was Because of Winn-Dixie. And that is when everything kind of like took off and changed.
So
So,
once you get a successful book, and now this is more of almost like an industry question. So
mm.
now, because of Winn-Dixie, okay, that comes out, and we'll get to the fact that that became a movie, in a minute. But that one comes out, and now do you kind of have street cred a little bit more, where now the next thing you're coming out with gets a little more pull because your name's behind it, where maybe 2 years earlier, okay, who's this Kate person?
Yeah, and it's funny because I got in, so that was 23, 24 years ago almost. And I got in at a time where you could still slowly kind of build a career. Publishing has changed quite a bit. It's more like a Hollywood model now where you've got to come out of the gate roaring, right? Or you're not going to get another chance. But when Dixie did really, really well. And because I was working at this book warehouse, I had a very realistic expectation for what would happen. The first time novel for kids, I thought if I was really lucky, 5,000 copies would sell.
Mm-hmm.
That would let me earn out my advance. And then I would be able to, maybe get a contract for another one. That would have been enough at the time. But what happened was beyond my wildest expectations. And so, yes, I was set to do the next one because of what happened with
And
him.
now I believe it's over 45 million books sold later. Here we
Well,
are.
when you said that, I wanted to argue with you for a minute because it seems every time I hear it, it seems so impossible to
Yeah.
me. So
Yeah.
impossible.
But listen, the internet doesn't lie. Well, it usually does. But in this situation, I am going to assume the internet is telling the truth. So you come out with all these books, and because of Winn-Dixie, Tiger Rising, Ferris, Mercy Watson, all these books, and a lot of them are becoming movies, and so forth like that. What happens that process that you have a great book, it's getting a lot of traction, and now suddenly there's talk and you're approached about it becoming a movie?
Yeah, you have one way. It's funny because readers um, always are so invested in, oh, will this become a movie?
Mm-hmm.
And then the next question is, why is it different from the book? And
Will
so,
it be as good?
so what I want to say about Hollywood is that, they come knocking, which to my way of thinking is always an exciting thing. But I only have one way to control things, and that's when they say, we want to make a movie. I either say yes or I say no.
Mm-hmm.
Once I say yes, it's kind of like it's out of control, my control. And my way of thinking is, who am I to say, oh no, this book is way too precious for anybody else to try and turn it into a movie. I'm always
Sure.
glad. It's kind of like your kid. You want them to go out into the world and have as big a life as they can. And so the movies, and there have been five now, are always different than the books, but they're also wonderful in their own way, and they bring people to to the book that would never find their way to the book.
Correct.
So it's just, to me, it is a wondrous thing, and it's always kind of like somebody constructing this marvelous dream. I mean, and I've had different experiences with different movies. Some of them I've been more of a part of the process. It
Mm-hmm.
depends on who's working on it. And sometimes it's just like I'll see stuff as they're working and I'll go, that's gorgeous, and I'm not involved. I've done cameos. I showed up at the end of the Flora and
Oh, yeah.
Ulysses movie,
That's
and
great.
yeah, and like that really gives you like a great deal of respect for what they do, because do you know how long it takes to shoot? 3 seconds. It's
Oh,
just like
yeah.
we worked and worked and worked. So it's fascinating. I'm always so glad to get to be a part of it and for it to happen.
Because the one thing I've heard, and obviously I think there's a big misconception out there, is if someone's buying your story,
Hmm.
you're not writing the movie. They're hiring a screenwriter to take your story and turn it. So that's where, when there are differences, and so forth, and I believe the storyline basically stays consistent, you would hope, from beginning to end. There's obviously these peaks and valleys where it might skew off course a little bit and then kind of find its way back home
Yeah,
at the
and
end.
and it's funny when I'm in front of a group of people and that question always comes up. Why is it different? There are lots of reasons it's
Hmm.
different. And I start just at the biochemical one, which is there is science. And this is borne out in every room full of people I've been in. Where I'll say, how many of y'all, when you're reading a book, see the movie in your head? And it is 70%. That's what the science shows us, that some people do. So that means everybody has their own movie in their head. And
Right.
whoever, you're not the one making the movie. So it's always going to be different. It's a different art form.
Yeah.
It like has different demands about how it moves. It's not the same as telling a novel. So
I think, yeah. And I think you can even simplify it more. Forget the storyline. When you're writing a story and you create a new character in your head, and anytime I've read a book, which isn't a lot, but every time I've read a book, when you have that main character, what happens in your head? You have a physical view of that person. And yes, sometimes the author obviously say, oh, brown hair, blue eyes, but it doesn't matter. You still
right,
have the facial, in your head. And then when you see it on camera and you see that lead who doesn't look like the person that's been in your head the last 10 years,
right,
I
right.
gotta believe it's like, whoa, hey, who's that guy?
Right. No, it totally, it makes me think of like, this is back in the day, like, but like talking, when I first got published and I would talk to my editor on the phone. It was before email and everything. And it took me forever to meet her. And when I met her, it
Mhm.
was like, wait a minute, I can't quite look at you because I've had your voice and I've constructed a face
Yeah.
around the voice. And so, and we all do that, and
Mhm.
if the movie does its job really well, a lot of times you can't remember what your original
That's right.
vision was,
Yeah.
and it's the same experience I have with when a book is illustrated. I see it in my head as I'm writing it, and then somebody will come along and illustrate it, and their illustrations will replace what I was thinking of, and I can't recall what I was thinking of.
From a writer's perspective, and I'm sure you've been asked this before, for someone who's seen your book and read your movie, how do you prefer it going down? Like, what do you think better? Is it to read the book, then see the movie, or to see the movie and then read the book?
You know what? Do you know how many interviews I've done, Mike? Like, I flat my guns all the time. I
Yeah.
have never, ever gotten that question before. It's
Who point for
really,
me?
yeah, right. Point for you. It's really, really interesting. I don't know. It's like if you'd never heard of the book, I mean, because it's exactly this thing we're talking about. When a book is beloved by you, if it's a book that really, really matters to you,
Hmm.
invariably the movie you're going to go, what? Why? Right? So it's almost like if you go the other way, I don't know. It's really, really interesting question. And this is the thing, and I found this as I've aged, that it's just like you get there are books that I loved that I reread, like 20 years later, and I get something totally different from
Hmm.
it. And so it's like it's the same with you're not going to each time you can't step in the same river twice. You can't read the same book twice because
Right.
you're always changing. You can't watch the same movie twice because you're always changing. You bring
But
something.
are you still an avid reader?
Oh, absolutely. I
Okay,
can't.
now
Yeah,
as a professional writer,
yeah.
I've had people in the entertainment industry on movies behind the scenes, and I've asked the question. So it's the same thing with you. Are you able to read a book as just a reader? Or since it's your profession, are you constantly in your head also analyzing it like, wow, I don't think they did a good job here presenting this scene, or I don't think the buildup here was big enough, or they just, or my God, get to it already. There are 3 chapters of just fluff. Let's get to are you really reading it as I want to be entertained, or are you also, doing
When it's
critiques?
good, when it's good, when it's really working, um, the part of me that kind of knows what goes on backstage totally disappears. So it's just like once I'm in, and then I'm not doing all that critical stuff. If if it works and then it doesn't work and I'm pulled out of it, then my critical mind will go, well, wait a minute. why didn't you do this here? But
Mhm.
if it's working, I'm in and I forget everything. And then what I might come back to it as is like, okay, how'd they do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you, for people who like, and, you know, people who read a lot, the one thing I do hear is, oh my God, this book took, 100 pages, get going. It was so slow. What would you tell someone who really wants to become a reader but gets frustrated with a book that, is so slow to develop? I mean, how long do you give it? Because nowadays there's 5,000 things I could be entertained with right now. I got 80 apps on this thing right now. If I don't like something, I go to something else. I can go to TikTok and watch 25-second clips. I
Right.
could put on a movie today, and if I don't like it, I have 20 other movie channels. I could go to a different movie. So maybe from your perspective, how long do you give a book before you're like, you know what? I don't want to read all 500 pages because I'm struggling to get paid through the first 40 or 50.
I've got two different answers to that. And again, it's a question that I've never really gotten asked before. One is when you're writing for kids, you have no time, none. You have to, everything has to work on the first page.
Yeah.
And otherwise they have to trust you. It has to really start rolling. And so that's a great thing about writing for kids. It's because they're not gonna put up with it, right? And so, and then if you're an adult reading a book and you're 25 pages in and you think, you know what? I hate to say this. I as a reader, it used to be I would, if I picked it up, I would read it all the way through to the end.
Right.
Now, and it's not that there's so many other things out there. It's just that I'm old. I'm not going to waste my time on something that is not
That's
working.
fair.
I'll just put it aside, you know? Yeah.
Now, are you still old fashioned where you're going to read, you want a book in your hand, or are you okay reading a Kindle or something like that?
The book is in my hand.
I had a feeling that was going to be the
I
answer.
was
Yeah.
going to say, you know the answer to that
Yeah.
question. Yeah, the book is in my hand, and I can. It is a comfort to me
Mhm.
to know that, like, if I get stuck somewhere, I can get text on. I can get a book on the
Mhm.
iPhone,
Yeah.
but it's like I do not fully become myself until I am alone with a physical book in my hands.
So are you nervous before you watch one of your movies?
Um,
Or are you just excited that let's just see what they do with it? Or are you nervous? I hope they did me proud, for lack of a better.
well, it's like it's like I said earlier, there are those varying degrees of involvement. So I
Sure.
almost always have some idea of what it's going to look like and how the story arc has
Mhm.
changed necessarily, and then um, yeah, I'm not nervous. I guess I'm more interested, and I'm also more. When I said that thing about how hard they work when I was on set for Flora and Ulysses, and I was on set for Because of Winn-Dixie too. I'd gotten there the day that the parrot was supposed to land on Dave Matthews' shoulders, and so and it was like it was not done with computer anything. It was the
Mhm.
parrot. No, the parrot was supposed to land on the dog's head. That was it.
Okay.
No one was very happy with me that day because I had conceived of this thing. So anyway, I see how hard they work. So by the time I'm watching it, it has almost nothing to do with me and everything to do with I hope they I hope that they succeed for them because it is so much work. And so I watch it not nervous for myself, but nervous for them.
Yeah, yeah. It's I watched the trailer yesterday for the Netflix The Magician's Elephant.
Yeah, that's a beauty. Yeah.
It looked like it. I mean, obviously, I don't have young kids to watch, but animated. But I am going to go back and watch it just because of our conversation. Yeah, it looks like a fun. It looks like a fun adventure.
Yeah. And that one in particular is kind of like this gorgeous dream that you watch somebody else construct. It's just like because art would roll in from that, and I would think, "Wow, what y'all are doing!" And there was so many different artists involved in that, and it's a really, really heartfelt beautiful film. Yes, you are duty bound to go back and watch
Oh,
it.
I am duty bound. Absolutely. I already told my wife this is in the next couple of weeks. Now that's animated,
Yep.
and
And
obviously some of your others were not. And obviously, when you're writing a story, you're not thinking, this would be a great animated movie.
yeah, I don't
So,
think, yeah, right.
is it different now when you're seeing your thoughts in a motion picture, like Because of Winn-Dixie, or you're seeing a story in, for lack of a better word, I'm going to say cartoon form. I know cartoon's the wrong word, but I'll use it anyway. But seeing your work in that form, any difference to you?
No, no, because, and this is, maybe again, this is age. But I do think it's that thing about learning how to like it, and it goes back to the metaphor of like the story is like your kid. You
Mhm.
put it out in the world, um, you hope for the best, but there's like this distance of it is that story is now leading its own life in lots of different forms. The
Yeah,
Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane, which has not been made into a movie, got made into an opera. So to sit and watch that story be transferred into that form was magical, and like and again did took me that much further to thinking none of this has anything to do with me. It's just the beauty of the story being translated again and again and again. Like the books are in 46 different languages,
sure.
and so it's just like, do you say, no, I don't read Polish, so I don't want it translated because I don't know if it's going to be or not. You let it go, you let it have as big a life as it can.
The it's funny you say that, because what I've heard with those kind of things, the same thing, and I'll see it sometimes with some documents here for some of my clients when it's in a different language. There's
Right?
no such thing as a direct literal translation.
There's not.
So by changing the words, you are potentially changing the tone, the
Absolutely.
message,
Absolutely.
and so forth.
Right. That is exactly right. And you're right. It that kind of ties into the movies a little bit when you say there's no way to literally translate from another language. You can't do it. And it's the same with the movies. You cannot literally translate the book, you
Right.
know? Yeah, it's an interesting point.
And we talked about before, when you're writing, did you think it was going to become a movie? And obviously not, but you sure as hell didn't think, oh, this book would be a great opera. You know, so clearly, and I've heard that from other people, in interviews, that you see sometimes movies or something that become like a Broadway musical, and it wasn't a musical. So when they're writing this movie or this book, and then now suddenly in the middle of their love story, the two leads are breaking out into a love song.
Right, right. But this was my like way back to when Dixie being made into a movie because Wayne Wang, the director of that movie, was somebody who liked to work with writers, and I went out to San Francisco because he wanted to quote unquote pick my brain. That's where he lived, and it ended up that what happened was I learned how to write a screenplay, working with him. And the thing that I got from that was so interesting. I remember sitting in his office and like it was like a light bulb had gone on. It's just like you're going to change this and you're going to change that, or you're going to have somebody break into song or whatever. But there's this tensile thing underneath that cannot be broken. That is the story, and it is much more fluid than you think it is.
Yeah,
And that was like a fantastic lesson to learn because everything that's happened to me since then, it has let me like let the story go and knowing that yeah, okay, it's an opera, but there is still this heart of it there, and okay, it's an animated movie, but yet that
yeah.
underlying feeling is still there.
Because if you're writing a book that's a lot of it in third person,
Yeah,
independent person telling a story.
right.
Obviously, you know what third person is, and now you're making it. That was for everyone else. I'm sorry. Yeah, you looked at me like, no kidding. I know what third.
But a lot of people don't know that.
Right.
A lot of people
Yeah.
don't know that, so it's just, yeah.
You gave me that look like, really? You're explaining that to me? Yes.
Industry talk. Okay,
Yeah.
yep, okay.
But obviously, when it's in third person and a movie is generally 100% dialogue, there's the rare exception where there's narration and so forth like that. That's even more interpretive of a screenwriter to take that and really change it up, because what I'm trying to convey through a third person, I now have to convey through dialogue between two people. Whereas
Right.
if a story is very conversation driven and you're writing a conversation, I imagine that's a much easier conversion in a lot of situations, always exceptions, into a movie, because you kind of laid the platform and
Absolutely.
a scene, how
Absolutely.
that scene's going to go.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too because it goes into like, with Winn-Dixie, learning how to write that screenplay, learning that exactly that thing. What you have, and the novelist Richard Rousseau put this beautifully. He's like, you learn how to do that, and it's like you have a toolbox, and you have like 27 different really complicated tools in it that you use for a novel. And then when you're writing a screenplay, you take out a hammer, and I mean, you only use like two or three. You have dialogue. That's what you have, right?
Yeah.
Everything, the dialogue has to work for everything. Like you said, sometimes you have a narrative voiceover. And you do get, a little bit of stuff where you can say in between, but it's just like, it is a much different bear. Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy. So I'm going to change gears a little bit here for a second. The reason we're talking today is you've been a client of our firm for a long time. This is the first time you and I are speaking, but you work with one of my partners, my office next door neighbor. He's probably with his ear against the wall right now to see if we're talking about him. But you work with Larry Gitlitz. Kind of just talk for a second about, since you're not a numbers person, as you put it, about with your career and the turns it's made, and so forth over the years, how he plays a role in your career and your personal financial life.
The number one role of Larry is his kindness. And it, you know what, I always think, and I've never said this to him, but like I think if he like was in Tahiti on vacation, and I received some inexplicable piece of paperwork that was making me hyperventilate, I could take a picture of it, send it to Larry on vacation in Tahiti. I would get his out of office, and 5 minutes later, Larry would show up and say, "Don't worry, do this."
Mm-hmm.
This. I mean, he is so reliable, so kind, and it might as well be, talk about translations. It might as well be a foreign language to me.
Yeah.
I understand none of it. So to me, and I remember somebody saying this to me when I first started to, have a career and make money, about the financial advisor part of it. It's about the relationship. That's it. That's what it is about. And that's what it's about with Larry. It's not only that he knows and understands all of that, it's that he knows how to have a relationship with me, who I'm always, oh, I don't know how many times I'm hyperventilating over something that has arrived here. And he
Sure.
always says, it's just like, and it makes no sense to me. Like I said, it might as well be, it might as well be in Polish. Can't make heads or tails out of it. It makes sense to him.
And how
And
did you get to Larry?
my agent, Holly McGee, Pippin
Mm-hmm.
Properties, uses Larry, and is one of the best gifts she ever gave me, because I was using somebody here, and I'm like, how am I gonna, like, I'm in Minneapolis. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, how does that work? And she's like, talk to him.
Yeah.
So Larry called me on the phone. We had this fantastic talk. We talked about his favorite book that he thought should be turned into a movie, which is Pillars of the Earth, Ken Follett, which is now
Look at
being.
you remembering his favorite book. You go.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And he was just, and I passed him, like my friend Ann, who is also a writer. It's just like, she's like, her accountant passed away. I'm like, I can help you. And she loves him
Yeah.
just as much as I do.
Yeah. And Anne was on the podcast, several months ago. And I know that gave you the impetus to get on because, she one upped you and,
Right. It's just like, Larry had said, Mike wants you on the podcast. And then Ann's like, "Oh, I did the podcast," and it's like, "What about me? What am I?
Oh,
Chocolate?"
you've been on the to-do list for a long time. I had to space out the writers, but no, I'm so glad we're talking now. So have you actually, as we're talking about the world changing and so forth, obviously you're in Minneapolis, so you're communicating with him by phone, and now you have the ability to communicate with him face to face, like we're doing through Zoom and so forth, like that. Do you do that, or is everything just via phone?
It's all actually via email.
Okay.
That's very rarely will I get on the phone with him. That might be sometimes when I'm in the hospital from a heart attack over something that has
Oh,
happened.
jeez.
But I remember, like, it 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 doesn't matter what it was, but it was something that I thought was the end of the world. And what Larry said was, "You're not the first. You won't be the
Right.
last. It's all
Yeah.
going to work out," you know. And I mean, I love him for his knowledge and his acumen, but I love him for his heart and
Yeah.
his
He's just a good guy. He's
yeah,
obviously very smart at what he does, great client service, but above all that, he's just a good guy.
yeah. And so I count myself very lucky.
Good,
Yeah,
good, good. So
yeah.
what's up with you now professionally? What are we working on? Anything we
Well,
can discuss?
I've got a novel all tied up and ready to go that will come out in March. I was just this is where I got the head cold. Probably I was just in DC with your friend from the podcast, Ann Patchett. We did an event together at the Library of Congress. Her new
Wow,
book is dedicated to me. My new book is dedicated to her. So we're both traveling around talking about that, and
that's great.
eventually we'll end up on the same stage doing that. So
That's awesome. It's nice that you have that friendship that's just continued to, to grow over the years and so forth.
yeah, lucky
Now, do
me.
you guys share your works before they're released for feedback and things like that?
Yep, yep. She's one of my first readers, and I Anne has probably like about 10 people that she sends out to, and I'm one of those 10 people. So it's a real treat, and it's also that thing where I have to up my game. You know, that
Sure.
thing we are talking about where you're thinking, why doesn't a book, why do you want to put this down? You have to like learn to like I mean, I have to be a really good reader in order to give good feedback.
So at the end of the day, when you decide I've written my last book, whether it's 10 years, 15, 20 years from now, looking back, how do you want professionally, not personally, professionally to be remembered?
Wow. My answer is kind of like a hybrid of personal and
Okay.
professional. Is that okay? I want to be remembered as somebody who worked to put their heart on the page and connect with readers. And so that means, like just this thing that I just did in DC, when you have an adult come through the line who says, "I read you when I was a kid, and you gave me my childhood." I
Um,
mean, that to me is the ultimate compliment. So if I
sure.
can be remembered that way, why are we talking about me dying, Mike?
No, I didn't say dying. I said, well, no, I was very clear, Kate. I said when you're done writing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I don't know that I ever want to be done
Yeah.
right. So yeah, yeah.
One thing
That
I wanted to ask you before, and I totally forgot. So we're going back probably 20 minutes in the conversation. So you just finished a book, and we don't have to talk about that book specifically, but what's the impetus where, I got an idea? Like, how does that happen? Where I have an idea for a book, or you just have a notepad where you kind of, every time something comes to
right
mind?
here. I've got it right here. I didn't know if it would come up with you and me. I use it all the time when I'm talking to kids. Here's my notebook.
Uh-huh.
Always have it with me. When they say, "Where do you get ideas?" I say, "Eavesdrop." And then here's a list of things that I think could turn into a story.
Wow.
So I keep that running list. And when I'm ready for the next thing, I go to that list and say, which of these speaks to me now?
Interesting.
Yeah.
When you're writing a book, and I find this fascinating. Obviously, you're in the children's genre, so obviously you're not talking 400-page novels, but you are talking some of your chapter books and so forth. Obviously, if it's a really young children's book, you kind of know what you're writing. You kind of know where it's going to end. It's going to end, not too far from where it started, kind of thing. But when you start one of those things, all right, this one catches my eye. Do you know when you start the writing process how that story is going to end?
I have no idea. However, I can tell you, as somebody who's got a lot of writer friends, it's different for everybody. Some people would never ever sit down to start to write without knowing exactly where they're
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I have zero idea. I have no idea. I just have a phrase or an image or a name, and I start there and see where it goes.
I think Mike Hoffman is a great name for a character.
I'm gonna
Or
jot it down in the
jot it
notebook.
down, put it in the notebook, or like the Hoff or Hoffy. I think something off of that I think is really catchy.
Okay, I'm gonna go with Hoffy. I like
Hoffy,
that.
yeah. My
Yeah.
email address is Hoffy, so yeah, it catches on. I think it's something you could totally go. Yeah, two F's, one Y. So yeah.
I like it. I like it.
Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you, pushing through with your head cold, but you live in Minneapolis, so I'm guessing you have head colds a lot of the time. So,
And thank you for, it was a fantastic conversation.
thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Adeptus On-Air. If you like this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. If you have a question related to this episode or have a request for what you would like to hear, please email us at marketing@adeptuscpas.com. You can also find us at adeptuscpas.com online or follow us at Adeptus on social media. The views and opinions by the podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Adeptus. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice.